Thank you very much for this invitation. It's a great opportunity to question the meeting of architecture and philosophy, since I am working about this since 20 years at least. I would say it's not easy to work this meeting, but I think also it's a very exciting, dangerous liaison, in a way, a liaison dangereuse. So I am reading my paper because I tried to do this by English. Sorry for my pronunciation. We know that Jacques Derrida highlighted the idea of an essential cohabitation, declaring the Collège International of Philosophy should provide the place for meeting, a thinking meeting, between philosophy and architecture, not in order to finally have them confront each other, but to think what has always maintained them together in the most essential of cohabitations. I am very much interested by this idea of cohabitation, and I will address today, in a particular, an hypothesis about the metamorphosis of this meeting, even if it's in essential cohabitation. And we are moving from one unicity of architectonics and principles, in a way, towards something which becomes multiple and of another nature. So there is an evaluation in terms of limits and passage. In other words, as opening up between them. In fact, I would speak only about this question of limits and passages, not only because of disciplines, but because of what is in the question of to inhabit for the humankind. So, from Aristotle to Kant, philosophy has used architecture as a mirror of itself, as the art of systems, and all philosophers took architecture as the mirror for philosophy. They were not spoken about architecture in a way, but they used architecture to speak for philosophy. And it was the capacity to refer back to a means of organizing knowledge, each in relation to the others. And it was all this kind of, this art of relation was very interesting for philosophy in architecture. And architecture is reflected in philosophy, with discovering the very essence of its foundation as set out by Vitruvius in terms of firmitas, utilitas, and venustas. This first kind of meeting can also be considered as a metaphorical game of mirrors. It's very metaphorical, in a way, this first meeting, in which each presents itself as prevailing over the other forms of knowledge. This willing to prevail was very, very strong, in a way. One as a science of theory, and philosophy thought she was master in science of theory, not yet, but before she thought it was. And the other, the architecture, as a science of technique, arche, as it was said yesterday, texture, tecton. And it's a systematicity of the approach in these two disciplines that characterizes this first liaison, in which each one considered to a certain manner that it dominated the other forms of knowledge. This first relation was very much about domination, a discipline with another. This posturing will collapse at the same time as the disappearance of an order and oriented, limited cosmos. In this dissolution, neither architecture nor philosophy could continue to consider themselves as being positioned at the summit. As you know, in the systemicity of Hegel's system, well, when I was a long time ago, I was a student in Lyon. Deleuze was a teacher for 5 years for me, and he did speak a lot about Hegel, but anyway, it was very interesting. All this systemicity with Hegel, as you know, how the architecture is positioned at the beginning of the dialectic saga of the spirit. But in this dissolution, neither architecture nor philosophy could continue to consider themselves as being positioned at the summit. Rather, they were obliged to recompose themselves to deal with the space and the time of inhabited milieu. And that's very, very strong. We can see in the century, in the 20th century and today, how we have the necessity in philosophy to recompose ourselves with this question of time and space. So we are obliged to meet architecture. It's a necessity. We have no choice to avoid it. And in a way, we are obliged to deal with this difficulty to meet another art. Because I think philosophy is an art, is a science, and is a technique, as architecture is, but in another way, of course. After a certain eclipse, to use Hubert expression, running from Nietzsche to the 9/9/18, there was an explosion of sorts of meetings between architecture and philosophy, marked by strong differences between authors and currents of thoughts. Some distanced themselves. They didn't want to be too much close. Others looked for forms of fusion. The proximity between architecture and philosophy was able to go quite far, as demonstrated by the famous collaboration between Derrida, Peter Eisenman, and Bernard Tschumi in the conception of a folie for the Park of La Villette in Paris. We spoke already a lot about this, of course, because it's so important for history of architecture and philosophy. A collaboration that was renewed in a way, and with a problem in a way also, because it's a way to think how it's possible to connect architecture and philosophy, and what is not possible. In fact, it's a whole relation between architecture and philosophy that found itself in a kind of deconstruction by a multiplicity of positionings. That is a question of multiplicity, which is so much interesting today, even if we are lost in this kind of multiplicity. But all of these meetings, of this multiplicity, multitudes of meetings, all about language. It's always about language. It's impossible to have another meeting between architecture and philosophy if it's not language. It's about words. But also it's about non-verbal language. And I think it's very interesting the way of a lot of PhD today in France we prepare about the spatial language in architecture. So how it's possible to speak about drawings, about models when you are not an architect. But also it's very interesting to see so many architects who want to make a PhD in philosophy to speak about drawings and models. But they need to have this kind of step outside the own disciplines to be able to meet it better. And the words of limits have to be questioned. Because I think that's a big question today, the question of passage and limits. The word limit is borrowed from Latin limes, limitis, a lane bordering a domain. It comes from rurality in a way, a path between two fields. a limit, a border. It refers to the fringes, those of the knowable and unknowable, of the limited and unlimited, of order and chaos, of permanency and mutability, and human and non-human. All these questions we, of course, are very, very, very present in philosophy today, but also in architecture, in research in architecture. And there is a proximity to the word passage, derived from the Latin passare, to pass, to traverse. Traversing responds to this Indo-European root, per, à travers, and the word experience, we have per, root per inside, such as the Greek expeira, and we find this also in peira, which means something is chaos, peiros, in a way, apeiron. All these words we speak about how it's possible to go through order and disorder. And it signifies, in Greek, poros, passage, both a path and a thought, something you have to look, you can look to see what it happens, which enables passing from here to there, through the line, or this zone of union and separation that fundamentally defines the most primitive of human situations. A French philosopher, a very famous philosopher, he worked in phenomenology. Henri Maldinet was a friend of Deleuze, and explained what is important, the importance to think the question of limits about this zone of union and separation, we defines fundamentally the human situation. The concept of limits were distinguished by Kant from that of bounds. Both limits and bounds are borders, but the difference between the two is the following. Bounds are negative borders. They stop things. They stop relations in a way. While limits are positive ones because they connect relations. They develop relations. The distinction, the mediation, or the crossovers all operate there. Whether it's a question of between here and there, between what is permitted and what is prohibited, between what is desired and what is. They designate everything there where one thing stops and another begins. It's a famous sentence of Heidegger about the limits, where he explained, it's very easy to understand, but it makes a big change when you take it seriously. That limit is something stops and something begins, something opens at the same time. Which means that limits is very paradoxal. Sometimes separate, distinguish, and sometimes generate new relation, a new relationship, revealing themselves to be surpassed and transgressed. It's very interesting also to think about transgression when you look about the question of limits. What kind of transgression in the meeting of things? In any way, limits are places of transformation, of metamorphosis. Certain voices mark themselves, for example, that of Michel Serres, who insists that passage and links establish relations between the new scientific practice and the domains of the fluctuating and the composite and the hybridization. It's a matter of considering the field and discipline as, and I quote Michel Serres, a continuum that is the birth of movements as exchanges. Methods, results circulate everywhere on its bosom. exported or imported, anywhere and everywhere. The new scientific spirit develops into a philosophy of transport, intersection, intervention, interception. In other words, the division has less importance than the circulation along the path of fibers. The circumscription of a region is of less interest than the knots, the crossroads, created by the confluence of lines. Knots are, according to this thesis, themselves regions. And when all this Mille Plateau, Deleuze, is about the question of intersection, interception, circulation, movement, dynamic, it's such a difference in philosophy in the 20th century to think about the multiplicity of lines instead of unicity of one line. It's such a deconstruction of philosophy. We don't even know what it happens with this today, because we know we find in Heraclite heritage, we find in Nietzsche heritage, but in fact we find everywhere in philosophy we are speaking about dynamics, about changes, about becoming. And I suppose the meeting between architecture and philosophy was very strong in these years. In a way, it was late in the 20th century because they had the same mutation, the same transformation to deal with this question of multiplicity of lines and intersections. In the development of the science, disciplinary rigor and specialization proved fruitful in delimiting the domains the object of study required make to determination to get a given form of knowledge and to avoid its dissolution, a preliminary requirement in order to envisage meetings with other disciplines. But the transdisciplinarity and indisciplines are also going to multiply, seeking other forms of relationships. I'm a professor in a school of architecture, and I chose to be in a school of architecture. It was possible for me to be a professor only in philosophy. It would have been much more comfortable to teach history of philosophy, because my PhD was in history of philosophy. But at the same time, I know it's very interesting, very important, if we want to have a meeting, to go inside in something, not to have an ersatz of something, not to have a very light education in something. For us, in our school in Paris, we try in philosophy to ask students to read texts of philosophers and to develop by themselves how they are going to connect with architecture. What is interesting is to go inside a discipline. As for me, since more 25 years, I go inside architecture discipline. I try. And it means I develop two cultures, not only one. No, it's not the same to have only a look about another discipline. It means a lot of efforts to understand what is about, and what is the language, what is difference, how it's possible to meet. Derrida calls upon a limitrophy. I would stay with this concept of limitrophy. We're thinking the potentialities of the culture of limits. I think it's such important. He gave this way. What is the potentiality of the culture of limits? Limit as a passage, in a way. And I would like to quote Derrida in L'animal que donc je suis. It is not about what grows and increases to the limit, but that which nourishes the limit, generates it, raises and complicates it, everything that I would say definitely doesn't consist in erasing limit, but rather multiplies its figures, complicates, thickens, delimits, faults, divides the line while making it grow and multiply. So this possibility to multiply the limits, to complicate the limits, and not to try to make it easier, I think that's the secret of the meeting between inside and outside, between public and private, between human and non-human, who are so important today in schools of architecture. The new meetings between architecture and philosophy share common ground, exploring resonance, connection between space and thought, space and concept, concept and affects and percepts, but also in regards to the events that appear suddenly, something we didn't think it was going to happen, but it happened. So we don't know how to understand it, how to speak about this. And I want to quote Jean-Luc Nancy, because a very famous French philosopher, and he said a very short sentence in a book which is very, very well quoted in France, but it's not translated in English yet. The book is La Dislocation by Benoît Goetz, The Dislocation. And Jean-Luc Nancy, in the preface, says, that which requires space, which calls it and desires it, is nothing other than that which is by definition without space, that is thought itself. I love this sentence when he explained the thought needs space. And it's impossible to work about thought and about thinkings without working about space. And I think it's very, very important, because when we realize this, we know it's not a question to dominate a discipline or another. It's only how it's possible to share thinking about space. And for philosophy, it's in architecture we find this a must. I think so. And we are invited by Benoît Goetz. It's this wonderful concept of dislocation. Is a student of Jean-Luc Nancy. He works about Deleuze a lot. And it's to take seriously not only dislocation, to be from places to other places, and never only in one place. Not only as an experience, but as a condition of all experience. So it means the multiplicity also with places. It's a big difference with the unicity of places. Rejecting all technical or semiological reduction of architecture, but exploring the ontological, physical, political, ethical, aesthetical, and I would add a poetic dimension of inhabitation, to inhabit. How is it possible to think about this with the question of limits on passage? The concept of dislocation expresses both the ontological dispersion inherent in all human existence and the power of the creation of spatiality. And in Genesis, Adam and Eve, vanquished from paradise, were confronted with the first dislocation, that is to say, division of space. Another stage was the decosmization, you can say, of the world that divided the terrestrial and celestial organization of places. In fact, the dislocation is defined both as the interactions between places, but also the raising question in relation to the dislocation itself. In this argument, in this point of view, architecture is thought as an aesthetical and ethical and political substance, and we could say an ontological substance, that constructs sea marks where man is held and maintained, reacting and working at a pre-symbolic level. This question at the pre-symbolic level is so strong when you try to think about the meeting of space and thought, the space and language, that we have to speak about empathy, about affectivity, about sensations, about perception. All it means about things you feel inside yourself, by your body and by your mind, not with separation, both of them in these limits and passages. I would like to quote Benoît Goethe, because he's very close with I'll explain. We work together a lot. Before constructing in order to be housed and make its lodging comfortable, humanity constructs in order to explain itself with space and even for itself a posture and continuity. To explain with space, we need all our life, and it's not enough. But also to construct, to build a continuity in humanity. It's very, very important. And all this question, in a way, is how it's possible to create something new, but at the same time to be in a kind of continuity. Refusing the generalities and simplification as disciplinary compartmentalization, the challenge is to continue the capacity of opening up, of perpetual departure, of surprise, as it was with the construction movement. About meeting architecture and philosophy, or literature, or cinema, or dance, and so on, it means to transcend the disciplines, to explore another situation that goes beyond the stage of analogy, like that of the juxtaposition of constructed knowledge in specialized sites or domains. As such, architecture and philosophy interpenetrate and question each other, not in a relation of surveillance or the illustration of one field in regard to another, but in a dynamic and uneasy relations about thinking the space and time human condition. Strongly renewed by the imperative interfaces with the urban, the countryside, territories, the environment, the landscape, and so on, architecture and philosophy have become constitutive dimensions to rethinking production at work. The convocation of knowledge, theory, and practice in the domains that affect not only the constitution of the vision and the expression of a thought, but a transformation of the world, take us back to the condition of dwelling in contemporary civilization. New challenges for regeneration and metamorphosis of the inhabited milieu are at stake. The value of the coexistence of cultures among themselves, the coexistence of culture and nature raises even more questions, so that for the first time in the history of humanity, neither architecture nor the city can refer to an initial foundation. We are without foundation in a way. We are looking for foundation. In the meeting, architecture and philosophy think what is responsible for. It means what they are in charge of. For me, it's very interesting to think what I am in charge in philosophy and working in architecture with architects, research in architecture. It helps me to decide what I am in charge in philosophy. And students, they do the same in architecture. And they have to say what they are in charge of in architecture. Nobody can say except themselves. I think so. Even while these models are in crisis, they acutely pose the problem of the impact of ethical and political sources. Architecture and philosophy are challenged to think and to invent. How are the limits and passages between logos, topos, aesthesis? The three keywords, they are common keywords for architecture and philosophy. They are interlaced, given that all spatial temporal experience implies a concrete manner to be somewhere in a rhythmic opening. It appears clearly that the meeting of architecture and philosophy may become a resting meeting as a structure for questioning what it means thinking and doing. What is this connection thinking, doing? The limitrophy, as addressed by Derrida, is a very stimulating way of thinking the limits and passages between thinking and doing. I quote Derrida, with limitrophy, we are undoubtedly in a zone of resonance between architecture and philosophy. Another logic of the limit is open up. I can say, to finish, that the relationship of philosophy with architecture is not easy. I answered a lot the question with the problematic of our conference, the uneasy meeting. But architecture has the power to solicit the philosophy. And in the sense, as reminded by Derrida, sollicitare signifies, in Old French, to shake, as in making everything tremble in totality. And for me, I can say, to work with architecture, and I go very far with this because I am in charge of PhD, I work with architects in some projects. It was like a shaker, and it makes everything tremble in totality. Thank you very much.